Tonight, the police sergeant, the professor, and the president. It all comes to a head over beers at the White House. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, a dilemma for parents. Doctors recommend their kids get an H1N1 flu vaccine, but
I don't feel just because the government's telling me that I need to get this, flu shot for her or my youngest that I should go and do that.
So how safe is it? We'll ask the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Danger on the highways. Bus and truck companies ordered off the road for safety violations return under new names, sometimes with tragic results. And a U.S. Marine gets a new human hand. Will this offer hope to thousands of amputees?
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. Well, tonight, a few guys are in Washington, D.C. having a cold one. They just happen to be a Harvard professor, a police officer from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the President of the United States. They're sitting down to try to hash out what happened when Professor Henry Louis Gates and Sergeant James Crowley had an encounter that led to a national debate about race in America. And tonight, the president, who has downplayed the notion of a beer summit, is trying to tap into that. Chip Reed is at the White House tonight. And Chip, the president said earlier today he preferred to call this a chat. But will anything substantive come out of it, do you think?
Well, Katie, we have asked White House officials repeatedly if there's going to be any follow-up to this meeting, if there's going to be any effort to make this a teachable moment, as the president has said, for the nation on race relations. And the answer has basically been no. In the Rose Garden today, the three men who ignited a national firestorm over racial profiling sat down for a beer. Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates and police sergeant James Crowley, who arrested Gates in his own home, were invited by the president to talk about lowering the temperature on race. The president said he hoped to turn this controversy into a teachable moment for the nation. But today, he downplayed expectations for what has become known as the Beer Summit.
This is not a summit, guys. This is three folks having a drink at the end of the day and hopefully giving people an opportunity to listen to each other. And that's really all it is.
In fact, though, for the president, it's also about political damage control, a photo op the White House hopes will quell the furor created by the president's own words.
The Cambridge police acted stupidly.
That comment infuriated many police officers.
I think the president should make an apology to all law enforcement personnel.
He did not apologize, but did later express regret for making the situation worse.
I obviously helped to contribute ratcheting it up.
But that did not end the debate. Some conservatives have recently gone so far as to call the president a racist.
This president, I think, has exposed himself as a guy over and over and over again who has a deep-seated hatred for white people.
I'm sure you noticed that Vice President Biden also joined the conversation. I'm sure you also noticed that the cameras were kept at a great distance to make sure the conversation remained private. Also, the president is not expected to comment after the meeting. It's all part of the White House strategy to just try to get this issue to go away. Katie?
Chip Reed at the White House tonight. Chip, thank you. That arrest in Cambridge and how it was all handled has raised a lot of questions about police procedures and training. National correspondent Jim Axelrod went to a police academy in search of some answers.
At the Connecticut Police Academy, 30 recruits are training to become officers. Some of what they must master is clear cut, like their time for a 1.5-mile run.
Yeah, 4.
Or how to write a ticket, which is covered in their 6 months of classroom instruction.
Don't get into a heated exchange.
And 400 hours of field training. But when they hit the street,
It's disorderly conduct.
everything won't be so cut and dried.
Get your arm behind your back.
Is it a crime to be disrespectful to a police officer?
Is it a crime? No. To be disrespectful? No.
Lieutenant Karen Bover is a training officer here. She teaches recruits that merely being uncooperative isn't a crime.
Step back! Step back!
And that while officers answering a call are stepping into the unknown, often alone, they must feel endangered or hampered in doing their job to make an arrest, which naturally will vary from cop to cop.
I can't tell you when you're going to feel threatened. I can't tell you when you're going to say, okay, enough. I've been here for 2 hours on this call, and if you're not going to cooperate with me, you're hindering my ability to do my job, and you're going to be arrested for interfering.
In 2007, there were nearly 710,000 disorderly conduct arrests across the United States. Unlike other charges, from speeding to murder, those disorderly conduct arrests were largely dependent on the discretion of the officers.
It's an invitation to abuse.
Eugene O'Donnell is a former New York City cop and prosecutor.
The law creates a situation in which different cops going to the same calls would handle them differently. The law almost commands that because it's so unclear. So if you took a dozen cops and you sent them to the same call, you might very well have vastly different results among that group.
At the academy, they're taught by the book.
It has nothing to do with whether or not I'm going to show you that, you'll respect me. We don't do that. You have to violate a Connecticut general statute.
But the book can be a complex read, as we've all found recently, once the recruits head to the streets. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, Meriden, Connecticut.
Now turning to health news and the rush to protect Americans against the H1N1 flu virus. 159 million Americans at risk are being urged to get the vaccine when it's ready, including 78 million children. That has some parents worried not just about the virus, but also about giving their kids yet another vaccine. Here's Dr. John LaPook.
Taylor, your sister's awake now.
Cory Bureau is giving her daughters the usual childhood immunizations. But if a vaccine against the new H1N1 becomes available, her girls will not be in line.
I don't want to have that kind of vaccination in my child yet until I know it's safe, 100% safe.
In recent years, a backlash against vaccines has picked up steam. A vocal minority fears vaccines can cause autism, despite consensus among experts that they don't. Also on the web, warnings that the new H1N1 vaccine could be rushed to market without enough proof it's safe.
Are parents going to be given complete, truthful information about swine flu vaccine risks and the right to say yes or no before their children are lined up and vaccinated in the school setting?
The concerns include possibly using chemical additives or adjuvants to boost the effectiveness of the vaccine. They have never been used in flu vaccines in the U.S., but have safely been used in others, such as tetanus. Critics also worry that some forms of the vaccine will contain thimerosal, a mercury-containing preservative.
Thimerosal has never been associated in any valid scientific way with any adverse effect to the fetus or to young people.
The government says a thimerosal-free vaccine will be available.
You would be heartbroken if you did not vaccinate your child and that child got sick with influenza and found that your child was in the hospital close to death.
But moms like Cory Bureau still aren't sold.
I don't feel just because the government's telling me that I need to get this flu shot for her or my youngest that I should go and do that.
The challenge for public officials? Convincing the public to heed their advice instead of a mother's intuition. Dr. John LaPook, CBS News, New York.
Thank you.
How many adults and children will be tested before the vaccine is available to the general population?
I don't know the exact numbers, but there will be testing on adults, testing on children, and testing on pregnant women to make sure that, again, we have a safe vaccine. Now, Katie, this is a vaccine that is going to be very similar to seasonal flu vaccine, and we know that millions of children, millions of adults, pregnant women take seasonal flu vaccine year in and year out. The strain is a little bit different, but our scientists have determined that this virus is reacting very much like seasonal flu.
Will adjuvants or additives be used in some batches of this vaccine to make it more potent?
At this point, that is not anticipated. Now, if things change, if we don't find the immunities boosted enough by the dosage, if we somehow have a mutation of the vaccine, it's possible that adjuvants will be used to both boost the reaction, the body's reaction to the vaccine, and also to stretch the vaccine further. But right now, it's not anticipated that we will be using adjuvant in this seasonal flu vaccine.
Will you be recommending that Tamiflu be used prophylactically or preventatively to keep the flu from spreading?
All the doctors I've talked to, Katie, say that that is not a wise use of these antivirals. The good news is the antivirals seem to be effective against this strain of H1N1 virus. but taking it ahead of getting sick is not recommended. We want to make sure that, Tamiflu and Relenza are not just taken. It doesn't really help you, and it may actually reduce your resistance to the flu if you start taking it now.
How much concern do you have that this virus could possibly mutate and become even more dangerous?
Well, right now, as you know, Katie, in the Southern Hemisphere, they are in the middle of seasonal flu and H1N1 virus. So we have teams on the ground in South America and Central America, in Australia, watching very carefully. And so far, there is not a mutation of the virus. And if it changes, the whole protocol for what vaccine will be effective changes with it.
Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius, thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
Great to visit with you, Katie.
And for my complete interview with Secretary Sebelius about the H1N1 vaccine, you can go to our website at cbsnews.com. Meanwhile, there is late-breaking news in Texas tonight. A huge fire at a chemical plant northwest of Houston. It sent a plume shooting high into the sky, and the smoke spread about 60 miles from the plant in Bryan. The plant is believed to contain ammonium nitrate. That's a chemical used in fertilizer, and it's extremely explosive. 10 people with breathing problems were sent to the hospital. As many as 70,000 people have been evacuated from the area as a precaution. They're being sent to an arena on the campus of Texas A&M University. No word on what started the fire. In Los Angeles, Michael Jackson's 3 children will be raised by their grandmother, according to a custody deal announced today. The children ages 7, 11, and 12 will remain with 79-year-old Katherine Jackson in Encino, California. Debbie Rowe, the mother of the 2 oldest children, will get visitation rights but no money. Also today, search warrants used to raid the Las Vegas home and office of Jackson's doctor this week reveal 19 aliases may have been used to obtain prescription drugs for the pop star. Among the names, that of Jackson's 12-year-old son, Prince Michael. Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News, a highway hazard that can turn deadly. Unsafe trucks and buses ordered off the road only to return using new company names. And now to a highway danger you may not be aware of. A government report spelled it out today. Hundreds of bus and truck companies that were ordered off the road for safety violations are still operating. As Don Teague reports, they're using the same vehicles. All that's been changed is their names.
They're among the most horrific accidents on America's highways. Crashes involving chartered buses. This one killed 17 people last year near Sherman, Texas.
We've got people crushed underneath the bus. The bus is smoking.
Investigators determined this bus company violated federal laws by using retreaded front tires and was operating after their license was taken away. It was among some 220 bus companies ordered shut down in 2007 and 2008 for safety violations, but the GAO has now found at least 20 of the companies are operating again illegally under different names. They found even more rogue trucking companies with more than 1,000 possible reincarnations.
It's very easy to reincarnate. It's kind of like going to the mall and getting a new set of clothes. You put the clothes on, you look a little different, but you're really the same person.
Greg Coots says unsafe operators still roll along America's roadways because there aren't enough investigators to catch them all or penalties tough enough to stop them.
So how dangerous are rogue operators? Well, the American Bus Association says 50% of fatal bus accidents involve operators who should have never been on the road in the first place.
All of which makes things more difficult for responsible operators like Bill Austin, in business for 17 years.
For those of us that spend the money to do it right, yes, it hurts from the perspective that the impression of the general public is tarnished.
Austin says he welcomes congressional efforts to strengthen oversight of charter bus companies, anything that keeps unsafe operators off the roads. Don Teague, CBS News, Dallas.
And we'll be right back. In Iran today, the worst violence in weeks as the police used clubs and tear gas against thousands of anti-government protesters. They had gathered at a Tehran cemetery to remember victims of the government crackdown, including Neda, the young woman whose dying moments were captured on cell phone video seen around the world. The protesters insist Iran's presidential election was rigged. In this country, a federal judge today ordered the release of one of the youngest detainees at Guantanamo Bay. Mohammed Jawad may have been just 12 years old in 2002 when he was arrested for throwing a hand grenade at U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. So what becomes of a detainee when he's sent home? Our national security correspondent David Martin has this exclusive report.
Nearly 1 out of every 5 prisoners released from Guantanamo has gone back to terrorism. The latest figures, compiled by the Defense Intelligence Agency, show 18% of 550 prisoners sent home or to another country are confirmed or suspected of what the Pentagon calls terrorist activities. That works out to nearly 100 former detainees back in the fight.
The so-called recidivism rate has increased dramatically in the past 2 years, which suggests the longer you're held at Guantanamo, the more likely you are to return to terrorism.
Lawyers who represent Guantanamo inmates claim the prison itself, indefinite detention without being convicted of any crime, drives them to terrorism. But CBS consultant and former Bush administration official Juan Zarate says the ones being released now are more likely to be genuine terrorists.
You've had individuals who are released who are harder core, more tied to the terrorist networks, and more ideologically committed.
Some have shown up in al-Qaeda videos, and at least one has carried out a suicide bombing. Others are back in Afghanistan fighting Americans. The number 3 Taliban commander in southern Afghanistan, where 4,000 Marines are currently fighting, was once a prisoner at Guantanamo, as was the man who is now chief of the Taliban's military committee.
The U.S. government has to take calculated risks and to a certain extent rely on the good faith and efforts of other governments. And sometimes that calculus just doesn't work out.
Defense officials expect the number of former inmates who return to terrorism to go even higher before Guantanamo is closed. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
In sports, the New York Times is reporting tonight that 2 sluggers who helped the Red Sox win a pair of World Series tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs back in 2003. Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz. This is the first time Ortiz has been linked to drugs. Ramirez, who now plays for the Dodgers, was suspended for 50 games earlier this year for violating baseball's drug policy. And coming up next, a breakthrough hand transplant and a Marine with a firm grasp on bravery. Finally tonight, the U.S. Marines are hailed as the first to fight, and one Iraq War veteran is certainly living up to that here on the home front. He volunteered for an experimental hand transplant, and his day-to-day fight could end up improving the lives of hundreds of wounded warriors. Here's Wyatt Andrews.
Last March, former Marine Corporal Josh Maloney became the first Iraq War veteran and only the 6th American to receive a human hand transplanted from an organ donor.
He wanted to touch. He wanted to be able to feel again.
4 months later, his hand is starting to work.
I can already feel a lot of things. I can feel hot and cold.
Josh served 2 tours in Iraq, but came home and lost his hand in a training accident. He tried prosthetics, but like 40% of the military's hand amputees, Josh found prosthetics too bulky and unreliable to use, but embarrassing to go without.
Just to walk around outside and be missing a hand, and it was extremely obvious.
Josh is part of an experiment in which the military is trying to learn if replacing the hands of injured soldiers and Marines might itself someday replace the use of prosthetics. The operation at the University of Pittsburgh was difficult. 11 hours to connect new bones, muscles, nerves, and skin. His occupational therapy is harder still. 6 hours a day of merciless pain.
It feels like 1,000 needles. It's very painful.
But the real experiment is how doctors are preventing Josh's body from rejecting the new hand. During the operation, surgeons also transplanted bone marrow from the donor, hoping to teach his immune system to accept the hand. Here's why that's crucial.
I can tie my shoes, I can dress myself,
Every other hand transplant recipient, including the first, Matt Scott, a paramedic instructor, has to take 2 or 3 anti-rejection drugs every day. But the drugs so suppress his immune system, he lives with a higher risk of fatal infection.
If somebody in a room has a fever with something like that, I should stay away from them. The drugs themselves have bad side effects.
But Josh, thanks to the donor's bone marrow, takes only 1 anti-rejection drug so far. According to Colonel Bob Bondre, who oversees the experiment for the Pentagon, this could be the breakthrough that makes hand transplants possible for more veterans.
That's the only barrier, is the rejection. If we can solve that, which it appears we can, then why not?
Josh now sees a day when he can touch, play baseball, or hold a child.
What do you see in this different future?
The same future I saw before I got hurt. I don't feel broken anymore.
And now, as every nerve and muscle comes alive in the hand of Josh Maloney, so does the hope for a new way to treat amputees. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Pittsburgh.
That's amazing. Good luck, Josh. And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.